Hey guys, how's it going? It is my different username here, and today we'll be covering one of the most surprisingly infamous machine pistols created from the original days of Czechoslovakia, and it was a weapon created for officers, tank crewmen, special forces, and apparently even kidnapping. Well, anyway, here we have the VZ61 Scorpion machine pistol made out of Lego. So, the VZ61 Scorpion, or the Samopal Vzor Model 1961, is the machine pistol designed by Miroslav Rybarz back in 1959, and it wouldn't be until 1961, however, when the weapon finally goes into full production through the Vastava Arms manufacturer, lasting until 1979. And since then, this little guy has been accepted into the Czechoslovakian army to be used as a sidearm of choice, giving the personnel the option of a pistol as well as a small submachine gun whenever needed. This weapon is even surprisingly still used to this very day, which is probably why we saw the ultra-nationalists using a lot of these back in Call of Duty 4. Oh, and the infamous part of this weapon that I mentioned earlier is the fact that this was actually used by the Red Brigades in the kidnapping of Aldo Moro back in 1978 and was responsible for taking him hostage as well as killing the few police officers who were there to try to keep him safe. So yeah, this little gun definitely has a lot of history behind it. Anyway, as I mentioned before, this type of weapon falls under the category of what is considered a machine pistol because it exists between that of a pistol and a small submachine gun. It's slightly too big to be just a pistol and is also too small to be considered just a submachine gun, but can easily fulfill the two roles individually. Alright, now moving on to the model, we could first take a look at the pistol grip, and when I first built this, I wanted to try to get all the small details as accurate as possible while keeping in check the dimensions of the grip. It is a pretty small grip size, and the details like the lining on the sides were somewhat sacrificed to help preserve this size. At least I was able to keep the grip from looking too blocky. Not only did I think it would have ruined the whole look of the build itself, but it even made the gun more comfortable to use as well. And given the fact that this weapon is super light and compact, it never felt like this was ever going to break on me, even when running the gun intensely. Moving up, we have the trigger, its guard, and the fire selector group, and the trigger guard has been rounded out and features some upside down techniques, which is pretty amazing. But what isn't amazing is the fact that the trigger here doesn't have any interaction with the safety switch at all. It really has to do with this piece here, but honestly, I just like the look of it, so that's why I ended up keeping it the way it was. And here we have the magazine for the Scorpion, and this is the standard magazine, which runs at about a capacity of 20 rounds, and something you'll notice is that one side you can see it extends to 4 studs in length, while the other only reaches 3. The magazine itself is technically only 3 studs in length, but the 4 stud wall is really meant to be like a guiding rod, or maybe like a type of reinforcement for the mag. Not really too sure, I just know that's how the mag was originally made. On top you'll see the 32 ACP or 7.65x17mm cartridge, and you'll probably notice that the bullet kinda looks ridiculously small, and you would be right to assume this. But the reason is so that round can actually fit within the magazine's dimensions, which also works with the rest of the gun. Moving up, we can see the mag release system, in which follows as the typical button press style release, and it was pretty tricky to get the spring tension to a spot where I liked it, but unfortunately the mag loading isn't really all that smooth and does require some force to be inserted properly. But unloading the magazine is actually really nice, and it doesn't need any interaction at all and could just be dropped easily, which makes reloading feel really nice. And what other kind of magazine would be used besides the optional 10 round magazine, of course? Here we can see both the magazines side by side, and the reason for this 10 round mag is so that this weapon can still have the ability to be loaded with a magazine even if it's inside its side mounted holster. And this magazine does allow the weapon to be more useful in a pistol role rather than a submachine gun role like the 20 round magazine. Now, the stock here has to be one of the most recognizable aspects of this gun just because of how much of a unique look it gives off. Besides that, it serves as a non-adjustable overfolding stock piece, and it can swivel back to a canted angle, allowing the weapon to be somewhat properly controlled, more for its fully automatic capability. It even features these newer 90-degree angled tube parts, which really brings the look of the real stock to life, and the stock is somewhat sturdy, surprisingly, but the only downside to it is just really how small it is. While using the stock, the gun gets about this close to your face, and it's not really the most comforty feeling to have the gun be this close to the face. I have seen videos of people shooting, however, where they end up using this as a cheek well, which I could imagine being useful in semi-automatic firing, but not in full auto. And I've even seen people do this. Yeah. Oh, and there is actually the option to remove the stock altogether. Not necessarily too viable, but does help the gun feel a lot more nimble, and you can even see more of the details on the gun as well than you normally could with the stock on, so I'll just leave it off for the time being. And if we move to the front, we could take a look at the barrel, where there's not really much going on here, but I did create some subtle sloping for the barrel so the design can mold properly into the receiver, just like the actual gun. And something new that I wanted to try with this weapon was using this barrel piece as the end of the barrel. I honestly think it works with this type of weapon, but I'm not sure if it will end up being a recurring design for other weapons such as pistols or anything like that. I don't know. Maybe tell me what you guys think down below. Anyway, up next we have the bolt of the gun, and this aspect for me was a really huge priority to get right. I wanted it to be able to cover up the cutout sections along the sides of the receiver, as well as the ejection port on the top, which they do pretty well. The bolt is even pretty crisp and has a nice sound to it whenever it is charged. And the whole thing is even ambidextrous as well, so it's possible to pull back on the right, left, and even both charging handles at the same time. And when you do pull back on them, you can actually see into the gun and see the bullet from the magazine itself, or just nothing at all when the gun is empty. The one and only downside to this bolt design, however, happens to be the fact that it doesn't actually have a full travel and only really moves back around 4 studs. The reason for this actually has nothing to do with the system or the rubber band, but instead has to do with the rear sight, which does have these 2x2 coupling plates built into the back of the gun. But honestly, they make really great looking ears for the sight, and that's kind of why I kept the design the way it is. And hey, since I did mention it, we might as well finally take a look at these iron sights. And here we have the front sight, and it's a simple post sight with protective ears surrounding it, which is pretty similar to that of the rear sight. And aiming these down is relatively easy enough, but realistically is seen to be only viable during semi-automatic firing for shots that are typically ranged around 75 meters. Beyond that, however, I could easily see this weapon realistically being used with more of a point fire scenario and in full auto, which does kind of make the sights not all that important to use. And with all that said, the VZ Scorpion has definitely made itself into a remarkable piece of machinery as well as history too, and it's a pretty fun creation to play around with. Sure, it doesn't have every single feature of the weapon, but absolutely has made massive improvement compared to my older and even oldest version of this model. And, well, we've made it this far, so I believe it's definitely time that we test out and see what this thing can really do.